everybody wants to have lunch. And I guess the main take-home message is send samples and help to broaden the network. So we switch to Fiona Sage from ZSL, who will tell us about conservation work for extinct in the wild species.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. So I'm here today presenting on behalf of our Extinct in the Wild Alliance partners, so Rewild, BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, the IUCN Conservation Translocation Specialist Group and ZSL. And I'm here to introduce and talk to everybody about the newly formed Extinct in the Wild Alliance and how this is a real opportunity for zoos and for everybody here today to work together to halt human-induced species extinction and how we can use this as an opportunity to contribute towards the GBF. Zoos and aquariums are generally the sole custodians of extinct in the wild species, and we need to ensure that by 2050 they have not slipped through our hands and are not lost forever. This is a huge responsibility for zoos, and it's something that we really need to take very seriously and consider at great depth, but it's also a huge opportunity. So I'm going to talk about how we can join together as a zoo community to contribute towards Goal A and Target 4 of the GBF to halt human-induced species extinction. And think about how as zoos we prioritise our resources in our own institutions, in our own collections, and how we think about these often neglected species. And as we'll hear from Hannah on Friday in her workshop, she's going to talk to us a bit more about some of the species planning within zoos. Zoos historically have not always made evidence-based choices around their species planning and haven't always considered threat status. So, our extinct in the wild species, these are the most threatened species on the planet globally, and as we know, the world is facing an unprecedented crisis of biodiversity loss, with international commitments for preventing species extinction repeatedly going unmet. They are often very overlooked as species. They are overlooked on the red list, and they're generally found in very small populations with a small number of individual holders, and they are all at great risk of total extinction. There are 84 extinct in the wild species recognised on the red list. There are many, many more species heading in this direction, requiring the same level of very tailored support, with 39 animal species and 45 plant species. And for every extinct in the wild species, there are two possible fates. Either they slip into total extinction, and we know there are 11 species that have slipped into total extinction since 1950, well, under human care, or these species can be downlisted, they can be revitalised. So it's very much up to us. The opportunity sits with zoos. The science can be applied and species can be recovered, and extinction in the wild can be prevented and even reversed. So just to show everybody very quickly, this is the global spread of extinct in the wild species, where they're endemic from. Often these species are island endemic species. They're often not the most charismatic species, so this is just the animal species here on this picture. So often they are very, very overlooked. And we need to consider over time the role that zoos have played in preventing extinction, and the IUCN position statement clearly highlights and celebrates the very positive role that zoos have played in preventing extinction. However, all of our extinct in the wild species are in an extremely perilous state, and most of these species are held in very small numbers. 33 of these species are held in less than 5 institutions, and only 2 of our extinct in the wild species are held in more than 50 institutions, shown here on the red. Also, most of our extinct in the wild species are held in very small numbers, so more than half of our extinct in the wild species are held in fewer than 500 individuals, so they are all at extreme risk of catastrophe. Lots of species in zoos do go extinct, and you can see under this grey line here some examples of species that we have lost from human care, Patula faber and the Katrina pupfish being 2 notable examples. Zoos need to commit to contributing towards the GBF and to work together and step up to prevent more species heading in the same direction. With our partners, zoos have the science to care and look after these animals properly, and as some of our zoos here are approaching very significant historical landmarks of 200 years of caring for animals, we have evolved and changed considerably. If we think back to the 1800s, where zoos were collecting animals, we then progressed forward to providing best practice and providing a really exemplary level of care to these animals, and we are now in a position to be actively contributing towards conservation. We inspire our visitors, and we advance our scientific knowledge, and we're champions of producing sustainable populations within our zoos. Animals are not simply surviving under our care, but they're thriving and producing populations that are suitable for release. we can be part of the global conservation effort to save species from extinction. If we consider the example of the Mexican pupfish and how much the husbandry of this species has refined over the last 10 years, the diet, the space that we give these animals, the life support, the seasonality, water quality, all of these factors have improved considerably and changed dramatically. Species don't just survive under our care, but they thrive. And we have changed and evolved in how these animals are kept so that we are producing animals that are suitable and fit for release. So this is a huge responsibility for zoos, but it's also a phenomenal opportunity that's in our hands. We can collaborate and work with our extinct in the wild species that we are the sole custodians of, and we can do impactful conservation. We can create vibrant and new, impassioned visitor experiences that engage our audiences and enhance our social license to exist. And we can use our science and our action, both in situ and in ex situ, to unleash our potential for species recovery. Generally, this work is very impactful, it's very highly fundable, and it generally creates quite a lot of media interest. So it provides us a huge opportunity to talk to our audiences. So, we have joined up with our partners, Rewild, BGCI, and the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, and have come together to initiate this alliance, and we encourage everybody to join us. This alliance is weeks into inception, so it's still very, very new, but we very much encourage everybody to think about how they could join up and how they could support. And considering the journey that all of these extinct in the wild species take, we rescue them, bring them under human care, establish the first ex situ populations, revitalise the populations to produce demographically and genetically viable populations of ex situ animals so that we have animals available for potential release. We release species into appropriate safe wild habitats and reinforce the conservation of translocated populations to stay in touch with them, post-release monitoring, and leading to their ultimate downlisting. All the way through, this work is evidence-based, it uses science to inform our choices and make responsible decisions as custodians of the natural world. And we very much hope that the partnership is an opportunity that people can take from and an opportunity that people can contribute towards. People will use and gain from this initiative. Many zoos and botanical gardens here are already working fantastically with extinct in the wild species, and very much the local structures that are already in place, all these recovery programs, are very much fostered, maintained and continued. But it is often only a small number of zoos that are caring for these species. Through the Alliance, we intend to build capacity, to generate knowledge, to really think about our species planning and prioritise where resources are apportioned, to create dynamic networks, and to share and create our stories to engage our audiences. So what can you do? What can your zoo do to become involved? And as we'll hear from Hannah on Friday, and some of the reports that are already circulating in the media and in literature, sometimes zoos don't make informed species choices around our species planning, and our extinct in the wild species are not being sufficiently prioritised. We need to ensure as a community that we prioritise these species and we achieve impactful conservation to enhance our social licence and enable us to fulfil our mission. We're encouraging zoos to step up as species champions, to really lead on this recovery work, to support directly or indirectly, to raise awareness. We have 700 million people visiting zoos globally. We can tell stories to our audiences, and to act as ambassadors to drive recovery. And this table here just shows for the Mexican pupfish just how small the number of holders are. We have one of these species represented in only 2 zoos. Mexican pupfish, socorro dove, and several partridge species all have active calls for new holders, as well as CHEC. So there are so many opportunities for different zoos to become involved in whatever way they may like. So if we bring this back to our contributions to the GBF, all of these actions contribute towards halting human-induced extinction by 2050 and the extinction rate of and risk of our species being reduced by 10-fold, and the genetic diversity within our populations of wild and domesticated species being maintained and their adaptive potential being safeguarded. And if we just think very carefully about the revitalisation step, and this is the step that zoos really play an active role in, if we fail at this point, then we have really failed on these species. The revitalisation is so key for continuing to maintain our genetic diversity and to safeguard the adaptive potential of these species. So looking forward, where do we want to be by 2050? We strive to let no extinct in the wild species slip into extinction under our watch, and we'll lead by example and inspire and help others to turn innovative plans into courageous actions. We want to have healthy, viable populations of extinct in the wild species ex situ, transitioning into thriving wild populations, concurrently with extinction being prevented by rescue into ex situ care. and wants zoos to be recognised by society and by governments for their roles in reversing the extinction crisis, and for people to advocate for them as a force of good for species recovery. Our collective achievements can highlight the potential for responsible species recovery as custodians of the natural world. So I'm just going to show a very short video. This is a real call to action, and I'd ask everybody when they go home to share this video with their audiences. I'll pop it on the Hoover app after the session as well. And please don't hesitate to be in touch with any questions. We're translating this video at the moment into German, French and Spanish as well, so it will shortly be available for others. Thank you.
Extinct doesn't always mean lost forever. Extinct in the wild species have vanished from their natural homes, but still swim, sway and hold on tight in the expert care of conservation zoos, aquariums and botanical gardens. These are the world's most threatened species, and their survival is entirely in our hands. Together, our science-driven conservation organisations can give them another chance, a life beyond extinction. We rescue and care for last survivors, working closely with governments, NGOs and research institutes. We share their stories. We revitalise their populations through coordinated breeding programmes. Working with local partners, we carefully release or plant them back into safe wild habitats. And even when they've settled back into nature, we stay in touch, ensuring their wild populations are reinforced long into the future. This mission requires a huge, united effort, but we know it works. That's why a new alliance to champion extinct in the wild conservation has been forged. Join us, share your skills, knowledge or resources, and together we'll fight for the recovery of every single one of these precious species. Let's give extinct in the wild species a second chance. Extinction doesn't have to be an end. It can be a new beginning.
Good luck for this very important task. And last but not least, we switch to Jacqueline Jürgens together with Simon Brusnot and Narissa Chow from ASAP and Sonia from Mandai about the One Plan approach and ex situ combination.
Thank you for that introduction. So I will be talking about our recent ASAP ex situ assessment. And as you were just told, it's was a collaboration between Copenhagen Zoo, Mandai Nature, and ASAP themselves. So ASAP is the Asian Species Action Partnership, and it is a partnership platform with over 200 partners dedicated to prevent species extinctions of highly threatened species, or critically endangered species in Southeast Asia. And it was convened by the IUCN Specialist Survival Commission and is hosted by Mandai Nature in Singapore. Now, ASAP just recently released a new strategy, and I'm gonna go through this quite quickly, so if you want to learn more about that, there's a QR code you can scan and read the strategy later. Not during this talk. And the focus for the strategy is investing in the people who will save species. And that's the central message as well. It is based on 4 strategic pillars, centered around the core aim to expand the scale and impact of ASAP species conservation. The first pillar is amplifying funding and knowledge by mobilizing the resources and increasing the amount of funding for ASAP partners to deliver conservation for ASAP species. And that includes in situ, ex situ conservation where needed. The second pillar, which is very central to the whole strategy, is investing in people by empowering conservationists in Southeast Asia to conserve ASAP species through training that advances skills, fosters personal and professional growth, as well as overall well-being, while also while also bridging the gender gap that exists in conservation in the region. The third pillar is strengthening local organizations by providing necessary training for and support for Southeast Asian organizations, and thereby making them more resilient conservation organizations. And lastly is fostering a dynamic network, and again this is very central to ASAP's strategy, by facilitating a peer-to-peer network and exchange between the partners. And with that, I am coming to the ASAP ex situ assessment. So we conducted a rapid preliminary ex situ assessment for all ASAP species to assess the need for ex situ conservation as part of the one plan approach to conservation planning for these species. And for this assessment, we focused only on captive breeding and not any other ex situ activities. And therefore, one of the central questions was, will species profit from ex situ breeding as a conservation tool? However, the main aim of this assessment was to establish what role ASAP can play as an organization in the ex situ breeding of the ASAP species, and how ASAP can add value to any ex situ breeding endeavors. So just to keep that in mind. So we loosely followed the conservation planning specialist group methodology, but adjusted that to our own needs. If you're also interested in doing an ex situ assessment for your own conservation planning, the experts from CPSG have made an online course you can take, which outlines the different steps based on the IUCN methodology, and you can find more behind this QR code. Again, please read that after the talk. Or come up to me and ask me about it if you want to know more. So following that methodology, we collected information on in situ status of the species, ex situ status with a focus on captive breeding and ex situ populations, as well as life history traits. And we collected that from a number of different data sources. A lot of them are probably familiar to you. And we used this information to produce species-specific information sheets that were then used to inform 2 expert workshops where species were assessed for opportunities for ASAP to support their ex situ breeding. So for our analysis, we initially considered all 284 ASAP species, and again, these are all critically endangered species. However, we excluded fishes and amphibians from our analysis because these will be assessed by their respective expert groups, Scholl and Amphibian Arc, later. So we ended up with 169 species of birds, reptiles, and mammals. So during the expert workshops, each species was assigned one of these 3 categories based on the opportunities for ASAP to support ex situ breeding. The first one is no ASAP role identified, second, no ASAP role at the moment, and the third, opportunities for ASAP identified. And I think they're quite self-explanatory. But I will go into a bit more detail on these now. And just to clarify, the first 2 categories do not mean that the species might not be in priority or does not have opportunities for ex situ breeding, but they're not. There were no roles for ASAP for these species. So there were 3 main reasons a species was assigned the no ASAP role identified category. And the first one was there was already a well-established program run by a trusted partner, and the program is likely to keep running as it is now without any ASAP involvement. So there's no need for ASAP to do anything new or jump in there. The second reason for some species was that in situ conservation actions should be the focus, as that is most likely to have impact, bigger impact, and is more likely to be successful for those species. And then the third reason was that it's not feasible to acquire funders for ex situ populations at the moment, and that is also unlikely to change in the near future, as the species either hasn't been seen in decades, or the political situation where it occurs does not allow to acquire funders. And so the second category is no ASAP role at the moment, so we have that temporal aspect there. So these species in this category need to be reviewed regularly because it contains species that are lacking information in some form. Then there were several reasons species were assigned to this category. The first one is that in situ should be the focus, so similar to the first category, but with this in situ focus it needs to be reviewed regularly, and if it's not working, these species will move to be a priority for ex situ breeding. And for other species, the in situ status was unclear, so more field surveys are needed to ensure their threat status in the wild. For other species, we don't have the husbandry or breeding knowledge at the moment, so they have either haven't been kept in captivity, are very hard to keep in captivity, or they haven't been successfully bred before. So the more husbandry development is needed. And the last reason for this category was that the species hasn't been seen in the wild in the last 10 years or so, but it should be a priority if it's rediscovered. So again, it needs to be reviewed regularly. If it appears, it will move to the last category, which I'm coming to now. And that is opportunities for ASAP identified. So species in this category were identified with a clear need for ex situ breeding, and current efforts either need support or a new program needs to be established. And additionally, there was a clear opportunity for ASAP involvement, and that can fall into four categories: communication, funding, proactive engagement, or capacity. And this is kind of the overview of all the three categories. In terms of the results, the majority of the species were assigned to the first priority with fairly even numbers between the three assessed taxa. This was followed by the second category, where reptiles dominated, and this is due to a lack in the in situ and the lack of information of the in situ status for many of the small herbs, as the experts called it, so the smaller reptile species. And lastly, we found clear opportunities for ASAP involvements for 25 species, over half of them birds, and that might be because Simon was in the expert group. But overall, this means we narrowed down the 284 ASAP species to 9% of the initial list. That should be a focus for ASAP going forward. So this was a rapid assessment, and it's a preliminary analysis that still needs to be further refined. Nevertheless, it gives ASAP the possibility to make more strategic and informed decisions in terms of captive breeding, and it guides the prioritization for stakeholder engagement for the organization, and also guides the further and more detailed ex situ needs assessments and species planning activities. And therefore, this assessment is supporting the conservation actions for critically endangered species in Southeast Asia, and hopefully helping to prevent the extinction of these species. And with that, if you want to know more about ASAP, there's another QR code, and now you're also allowed to look at it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this comprehensive work, and